And we are back on the Zero Hour. I am Richard RJ Eskow. And you know, as Democrats, liberals, progressives, sane people contemplate the possibility, however great or remote, of a Donald J. Trump presidency, and as they ponder the dystopian hellscape that the United States would almost certainly become under such a presidency, a lot of people have thought, well, at least there's one bright spot there. He was the only Republican presidential candidate to say that he would definitively that he would not cut Social Security. So at least there's that, right? Well, perhaps not. Our next guest is here. Will talk to us a little bit about that. It is our good friend, Nancy Altman. She has a 35-year background in Social Security, private pensions, and related areas. She's director of Social Security Works, co-chair of the Strengthened Social Security Coalition and Campaign, and the author of The Battle for Social Security, as well as the co-author of the book, Social Security Works. And she joins us now. Nancy, as always, great to talk to you.
Thank you so much again for having me.
Of course. Now, listen, even I have had those moments of thinking, while they're building the wall and deporting 11 million people and banning Muslims and so on, at least we won't cut Social Security. But apparently not so, right? You just wrote about that. Tell us the story.
Well, Donald Trump is the one Republican that really gets the politics of Social Security. You know, he's been trying to run a populist, or sort of from the right, some populist strands in his campaign. And one of them, as you pointed out, was he would not cut Social Security. But, of course, now he's pivoting to the general election, and he's trying to get money from big donors, and he's trying to get people like Paul Ryan to endorse him. And their orthodoxy is we must cut Social Security. So there was the day before his Donald Trump's meeting with, famous meeting with Paul Ryan, his chief policy head, his policy director, went to a closed meeting sponsored by Pete Peterson, who, of course, has run a 30-year campaign to cut Social Security, and said, we've been saying this, but we don't really mean it. We will, in the first term, we'll we'll consider changing Social Security. And it's not a surprise because that's Trump's background. He's in the past opposed Social Security, and of course he's very hard to be trusted. But at least, as you said, there was a little bit of, maybe he's finally got it, but apparently not.
One of the things you pointed out in your piece, Nancy, about Trump, when you were describing some of these pivots, only 17% of Republican voters support Social Security cuts. You know, it's fascinating when you think, as a reflection on the political process, when you think about the fact that there were 17 candidates for president on the Republican side, 16 of the 17 supported Social Security cuts or appeared to in some way, shape, or form. I think maybe Huckabee wavered a little bit. So say 15 or 16 out of the 17. The one who won was the one who said he wouldn't cut Social Security. Now he says he will. It makes you wonder what that says about our democratic process.
Well, it's a couple things, and I think you raise a very good point. And interestingly, a day or two later, another spokesman said, oh, no, he's not going to cut Social Security. So he's kind of winking, trying to have it both ways. The truth is that, as you point out, the American people are very much united in favor of expanding, not cutting Social Security. And this includes quite conservative Republicans, the base. But until recently, the Democrats did not clearly distinguish their position. In 2012, Barack Obama, apparently not wanting to talk about Social Security in the debate, said, well, I don't think Governor Romney and I disagree that much. And, of course, I would hope, I think they disagree substantially. But when the Democrat says that, it's just handing the issue away. This has always been a winning issue for the Democrats, and this is just saying, okay, let's neutralize this one. This year, I think there'll be a change, because even if Donald Trump continues with no cuts, as you know, Senator Sanders and Secretary Clinton have both Senator Sanders for a long time, and Secretary Clinton more recently have been saying expand, don't cut Social Security. So it could be between expand and no cuts, but I think more likely it's expand. And Donald Trump, this is one more area we just can't trust what he says.
Yeah, I would hope that, assuming that the general election is between Trump and Clinton, I would hope that Hillary Clinton would become even less ambiguous in her endorsement of expanded Social Security benefits. But there's no question she's clearly against cuts. He's from a party that reflects cuts. She's clearly said it needs to be expanded in some way. It's highly unlikely he's ever going to say that. And I think a shrewd Democratic Party would use these recent series of meetings and this kind of waffling on Trump's point, number one, to undercut his reputation as a straight shooter, and number two, to hurt him on this issue of Social Security by drawing a very clear distinction.
And there's a really important point here, and that is that there's sort of the orthodoxy among the Democrats is, well, you after the and for the Republicans too, for that matter, after you win the primary, the nomination, you pivot towards the center. But in the case of Social Security, the center is not where the serious people in Washington think the center is. The center is for no cuts. Or maybe even for expand no cuts. It's given that the American people are about 80% united, the center is also where the left is on this. So it's really important that I worry that she, in thinking she's going to have to pivot towards the center, that she stops talking about expanding Social Security, and that would be a huge mistake for her and for down ticket, because this is a defining issue. It's a bread and butter issue for seniors, for people with disabilities. It's an issue people will vote on, and we need voter turnout.
Yeah, I always go back, Nancy Altman of Social Security Works, I always go back to the polling that Social Security Works did in around 2010 that showed that after the Republicans tried to privatize Social Security in 2005, Democrats had something like a 25-point advantage on the issue of which party do you trust with Social Security. But by the time President Obama had given us 2 years of deficit cutting talk that rolled Social Security in with the general budget, even though it doesn't belong there, that had essentially been frittered away to nothing. And the Republicans ran on a what do they call it, a seniors' Bill of Rights that year to further obscure the difference. And so I think you're absolutely right. I think they need to sharpen that distinction. I think it's in their self-interest politically as well as in the interests of the country. Now, I have to go to something you wrote in your piece. Trump and Ryan agree, let's dismantle Social Security, because as you know, Nancy, I've written about the history of Social Security. I wrote a lot about the Eisenhower Commission that Republican President Eisenhower put together that debunked a lot of the myths that are still being used to attack Social Security today. And that was a commission that had the president of MetLife on it, all sorts of, pretty solid business types, as well as labor leaders and so on, saying, that it's untrue that Social Security, all the stuff we're hearing today. Yes. But here's what I didn't know that I got a kick out of that you put in your piece. A 1954 private letter from Dwight D. Eisenhower to his brother. Eisenhower wrote about those who want to abolish Social Security, quote, "Their number is negligible and they are stupid."
It's very interesting because, as you know, President Eisenhower had spent his life in the military, so no one knew where he stood on a variety of issues. And, in fact, both parties really wanted him to run on their ticket, and he chose to run as a Republican. This was the first time a Republican had won since the New Deal. So conservative Republicans were hopeful they could undo the New Deal. And they, as you mentioned, and as you've done scholarship on, you know that there were efforts to very beginning of the administration to get him to turn against Social Security. But it turns out that he really understood Social Security. He described it as in the tradition of self-help, and he made a number of public statements that were clear, and he also proposed legislation that would expand Social Security. So it was clear that he was a supporter, but it is true. But he wrote a letter to his brother Edgar, in which he said exactly because, and I don't know if he ever thought it would become public, he was much more blunt and to the point than you would expect. And he also said, should any political party attempt to abolish Social Security, unemployment insurance, and eliminate labor laws and farm programs, you would not hear of that party again in your political history. Now, unfortunately, he was. I think it was true at the time, and the Democrats didn't go in for the kill. And he also called the people, in addition to saying their number is negligible and they are stupid, he said the people who want to cut Social Security are a tiny splinter group, and that is true today. Mm-hmm. It's the people on Wall Street, it's the ideologues, it's the Koch brothers, it's Pete Peterson. The vast majority of American people support Social Security.
Right, they are tiny in number, and they are stupid, and they are rich, unfortunately. So that yes. does affect things. My theory, by the way, parenthetically, Nancy Altman, about Dwight D. Eisenhower is that as a career military man, a lot of people don't understand the military in many ways is kind of a communitarian organization. You know, there's a common good recognized among members of the military, and I think perhaps that gave him his unusual for a Republican look at things. And as you know, in 1956, in the Republican Party platform, he and his party, his Republican Party, actually boasted about the fact that Social Security enrollment had increased during his first term. So that was certainly a different kind of president that we had now. But I think more broadly, that aside, the Eisenhower Republicans aside, who are, I guess, an aberration historically for that party, you make another good point in this piece, which people need to understand in this as an election year. The Republicans have always been against Social Security. As popular as it is with the public, it has never, starting from its inception its introduction in 1935, it's never been popular with the Republican Party. They've always tried to destroy it, just as they did in 2005, right?
Yes, it undermines every one of their principles that they hold dear. The idea that there's some things the government does better than the private sector is something they don't want to acknowledge. But Social Security is much more efficient than any private retirement arrangement you can find. It spends less than a penny of every dollar on administration. There is no way that you will find a private retirement program. Most of them are at least 10% are administrative costs. So they don't like it because it's a Democratic invention that has helped Democrats win elections, and they don't like it as a policy matter because, as their name says, it works, and they don't want to be part of showing that the government works.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, and I think that's why it's not only a threat to them because some of the solutions involve for example, lifting the payroll tax cap, which would mean higher taxes for their billionaire backers and so on. So there's always that self-interest. But I think ideologically, its very success, much less its existence, is an affront to everything they believe in and basically a disproving of everything they claim. So I guess in conclusion, I would say, okay, so we're going to see a race involving Donald Trump, who is, whatever you think of him, and believe me, I don't think either of us think anything very good.
No.
He is a consummate salesman, and he's going to try to convince the public that he is all for Social Security, even as he has his representatives like his policy director, the lobbyist Sam Clovis, out there reassuring people that, yes, he will cut Social Security. Are you worried at all that people will get misled and actually believe that he'll keep Social Security safe if he's president?
Well, he and the Republicans are in a hard spot because if he does take that line, and that's the politically astute line to take, and say, no, this guy doesn't speak for me, I'm against all cuts, then you go to Paul Ryan and everyone else who's running for office and say, do you agree with your standard bearer? Are you going to support him? Are you going to undermine him? What's your view? And if it puts pressure on them. And if they convince him to not go out and say that, then he's making himself quite vulnerable if, as you point out, the Democratic standard bearer understands that this is a real opportunity and takes advantage of it.
Very well said. And by the way, speaks to what I always say, which is if you really want to embarrass a Republican, ask him or her about policy. Absolutely. I mean, I well said. And as always, Nancy Altman, Executive Director of Social Security Works, thanks for coming on the program.
And again, thank you so much for having me.